Dear Cove listeners, wishing you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year from all of us at the Cove. Welcome to this very special holiday season double episode. I wanted to keep you all stocked up with some bullish and big brain discussions. So I've got Kel, who's an analyst at Mezari, on first, and we're going to chat about, I guess you can think of it like an extended crypto Twitter discussion. We go deep on a bunch of the main topics around Solana and Ethereum, as well as a sort of quick tour of some other promising L1s, which Kel is keeping an eye on. And after that, I've got Joe, who's coming on for a sponsored interview to cover what the Composable team is working on. Composable is sort of laying the pipes to connect cross-chain IBC ecosystems, and they're connecting Solana soon, which is exciting stuff. I want to take this moment to sort of thank everyone for listening to the Cove in 2023. We've had some good times, we've had some tough times, and I'm pleased to let you know that in 2024, we'll be back bigger and better with a rebrand and some interesting sponsors coming on board to take things to the next level. So without further ado, enjoy the pod and see you in 2024. Alrighty, I'm here with Kel, who is a researcher at Mezari and someone I've got noties on Twitter for, so I'm very excited to have you actually on the pod and to talk about kind of like what's going on. It's been a super exciting last couple of months, especially for those of us who are a bit more in the Solana ecosystem, which I can see you are. So today I'm just keen for us to kind of chew the fat, talk about like with the different ecosystems we're looking at, to go a bit more into your thesis around Solana, and just, basically get your kind of hot takes also for 2024. So awesome to have you on. Welcome, Kel.
Thank you. I'm excited to dive straight into it.
Yeah, nice. Just to kick things off, like kind of it's a crazy moment. There's a lot of like meme coins. There's a lot of craziness going on. Like what's top of mind for you these days?
Top of mind, I would say right now we're seeing like either the emergence or resurgence of a number of different ecosystems. Of course, we'll discuss the Solana ecosystem in depth, but there's also, Cosmos, and then within Cosmos, there's Celestia, and there's on Bitcoin, there's Ordinal's ecosystem, and you can kind of go down the line. There's, Sui and Aptos are kind of waiting in the wings, and Say is having a moment, and all these different things. And I think that all of these different approaches are all, somewhat promising in their own respect. When you're looking at trying to solve different kinds of problems, I think the big difference between all of these different ecosystems and the Solana ecosystem is that from a tech stack perspective, Solana has already proven that it can handle a certain amount of demand in terms of like block space usage that all these other ecosystems are still looking to prove. So you look at something like Say, it's barely just launched. There's not that much activity there. It takes time for like a host of developers to build stuff, and then maybe 10% of that gets used, and then you find out like, can the chain actually handle, that amount of usage? Whereas with Solana, it's already like a cycle or a cycle ahead, in the sense where it came out, 2020, it had these kind of lofty sort of ambitions, and then it got battle tested. It found out that, hey, we actually go to shit when we get hit with like an NFT rule, or we actually go to shit if people just, DDoS the validators, right? And then they've now taken steps to fix those problems, and you don't see those anymore. And so that's why I give a huge edge to the Solana ecosystem through this cycle with respect to like actual applications being built out. It's mainly because, the tech layer itself has already been pretty battle tested, especially relatively to all of these other ecosystems.
Yeah, I got you. And it feels like Solana's actually already out ahead, and yet Firedancer is not that far away, and Firedancer promises at least to give another huge step up for Solana. So That's, I guess, another reason why Sol Maxis have a bit of confidence these days. And it is interesting. Like, as soon as you actually go out and use some other ecosystems, you actually appreciate Solana even more. Very often, I would say. I'm curious. One question: like, how do you kind of keep track of all the different ecosystems, or do you keep track? And like, how do you do it? Because it feels to me like it's enough of a part-time job just to stay on top of Solana. So, do you have any tips there, or thoughts?
I think it's definitely a balance of one, like ideally you have some people you trust who are covering these other ecosystems and you can kind of rely on them to keep you somewhat updated, either via direct conversation or their posts on Twitter or stuff like that. So like in the case of Musari, there are analysts who cover a lot of the Bitcoin stuff or even like a lot of the AI stuff, which is a whole nother ecosystem I haven't even discussed in the beginning. And so I can kind of go back and forth with them and then combine that with people who I've met or found via Twitter, put them in a Twitter list. And it's honestly a huge hassle to like add people to lists. But once I kind of started getting in the routine of just that person's interesting on this topic, add them to a list or make a new list, then, eventually the lists get robust enough that, if I'm really on my game, I can spend 5, 10, 15 minutes catching up with each ecosystem list, let's say. Sometimes there's nothing really there. Other times people are actually having interesting discussions and stuff and can keep, maybe not 100% of information in all the auxiliary ecosystems that I don't focus on. But even if I get 70, 80%, that's a huge advantage compared to, most people are getting 0%, right? So,
yeah. And I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of like someone who's mostly on Ethereum, with relatively small amount of effort, they could have been on like the Jito airdrop. They could have been on a few different airdrops without having to be like completely on top of the Solana ecosystem. So there's definitely a space, I think, there, which is still missing a little bit in terms of like summarized content for different ecosystems. Like, how can I get up to date with Cosmos without having to be on Twitter all the time? Just a summary. But yeah, it sounds like you're saying that basically curating all that, like curating across different ecosystems and trying to like get as much signal from the noise, which is the big challenge in the bull market. I think you get so much more information than in the bear. In the bear, like you see this awesome like technical advancements and like you can kind of stay on top of it. But in the bull, there's just so much more stuff coming out. So that's a constant challenge. Let's move on here. I'm curious to kind of get your take across a few of the ecosystems which are kind of like a bit meta, I would say, these days on crypto Twitter at least. So we can just kind of run through and like you can give me your thoughts and then kind of like where you think they're at these days. Let's start with Cosmos.
So Cosmos has gone through an interesting like swing back and forth of events where Cosmos was the kind of original, not necessarily like they wouldn't have called it like roll up scaling thesis, but you have the different Cosmos zones and then they all interact with the Cosmos hub and they use IPC, they all communicate, blah, blah, blah. So that they were the original progenitors of that kind of vision. And then last year, it seemed like they had lost that vision to Ethereum, and then like Ethereum had kind of basically rubbed Cosmos's like kind of vision and came out with all these roll-ups and optimism and arbitrum, and they seemed like super successful and whatnot, and they are successful in their own right. But this year now you have like several Cosmos chains that all seem just as, if not more promising than the corresponding roll-ups on Ethereum, in particular because of the ability to do things like leverage IBC and have like much more secure kind of cross-chain communications. The biggest reason why I've never liked this vision is, we see bridges get hacked for like $800 million. It's like, all right, I don't want to put my money in some like trusted bridge, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Cosmos is definitely the most ahead when it comes to figuring out like a secure way that a bunch of basically different chains can kind of talk to one another while also remaining somewhat unique and somewhat distinct, and allowing like, the DYDX to customize its own chain in a certain way, then allowing these other chains to do the same. So I think it's in a decently good spot. There's been a lot of controversy. There's been a lot of people saying Cosmos has died, but I think it's in a decent spot.
Yeah, and the next one we're moving to, I believe, is actually like on like they're part of the Cosmos ecosystem. So the next one I got here is Say.
I think it's one of those things where there's a lot of excitement. It's similar maybe to like an early Solana or something like this, or this any one of these early chains that there's a lot of potential, but it's a waiting game to see if that potential is realized, right?
And the speculation game, right? Which is what we love in crypto.
Speculate. Yeah, I guess to a certain extent it's all a speculation game, but when you look at something like a Say versus, I don't know, like let's say, just more mature ecosystems, and it's not a knock on Say, they're just younger, so like there's going to be less by default. There's just a lot of, for me at least, there's a lot of unknown unknowns, similar to like, let's say you found Solana in 2020, which I wish I did, but I'm not going to come here and say that I was, buying with, Kyle Salami and all them. Like you couldn't have known really that, NFT mints are just going to shatter the chain for like a day, or maybe you didn't know and you just thought that they'd fix it. So it's similar with Say, like right now, I can't tell you for sure, or like with any degree of confidence, like what kind of problems they may or may not run into down the line when, all of these teams actually start to deploy and there's a much more robust ecosystem as compared to now when there's like relatively not that much going on. So I think it's super promising, and it's definitely a step forward on a technical basis, but it's just a waiting game to see, like, number one, like, is a tech good under stress? And number two, like how much demand is there, for Say or for another chain at like a level of maturity.
Got you. Yeah, I mean, my experience so far was that I bought some Say and I tried to withdraw it from Kraken onto on-chain and it got stuck twice. So I haven't had the chance to really get into it yet, but it's not a good start. Okay, let's move on next. I guess the next one is also, actually, I know nothing about this, to be honest. I see it shield all the time. I know nothing about it, so I won't even pretend. Injective.
It's kind of similar boat, honestly. Like, as I say, of course, like tech stack wise, it's different. But again, it's like just one of those things where could there have been improvements made in terms of like, is Injective another leap forward tech wise? Like, potentially. But it's one of those things where I just don't know until it reaches a certain level of like, people are really trying to.
And go ahead. To use it like at scale more. Is there, like, I'm curious just on a general like high level narrative perspective, like in general, I've seen Solana and Sui and Aptos being presented as like, what is it, like generate Gen 2 blockchains, or like there's some different kind of terminologies that try and kind of differentiate these newer blockchains that have higher throughput. Are Injective and Say like in that kind of pedigree, or is it again, supposedly another step forward from those like Gen 2 or whatever we want to call them, high throughput?
I guess I would personally say that they were in this sort of next gen category. It's just like a different approach within that, because all the next gen chains are all defined by the same kind of proposition of we have found a way to do like very low fees and very high throughput at scale. That's how I would define like next gen chain. And I definitely think that's an Injective fit into that category.
Got you. Okay. Next one is, I guess, a little bit even newer than them in the sense that I think it's still in DevNet, but I've got Monad here.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Monad is definitely one of like the very high hopes like projects, like maybe even more so than the other two, in the sense where, you know, we've discovered that the EVM has these problems, where like, you know, people have very quickly gone from like parallel execution means nothing to like now everything needs parallel execution. And like Say has this with the EVM as well, but it's, at least to my understanding, going to try to be a more like specialized ecosystem. Like Say is very DeFi focused, whereas Monad is, you know, the meme at least is that it's the parallelized Ethereum. You know, it can just be Ethereum but with, you know, the parallelized EVM and also like custom database on the back end that allows you to access different parts of like the data in parallel and stuff like this. And that has definitely drawn a lot of attention and a lot of like hope, and a lot of community drive as a potential way to basically, you know, not to over hyperbolize, but to fix Ethereum in a way. And so I definitely think that's going to be, you know, if and when Monad comes out, that'll be a drop to watch out for sure.
Yeah, I interviewed Kevin not too long ago on the pod, and I was also really impressed with Monad. That's definitely one to watch. And if you're interested in this topic in general about, like, for example, comparing the way that the EVM is processing transactions versus Solana and like how Solana parallelizes, I highly recommend. There's a podcast recently from Uncommon Core with John Charbonneau, which is a really, really good listen, and goes into like a lot of depth about, you know, like comparing and contrasting them. So that's a useful listen for the listener. Let's go to the next one, SVM rollups. And I guess here I'm actually thinking about Eclipse.
Yeah, so I think that in my opinion, like I can buy the, you know, even as someone who's been a Solana bull, Solana guy, whatever people append these names onto me, like I can see this sort of vision where, like, you know, the whole modular thesis, at least as I've heard it, is, you know, as apps get to a certain level of scale, they really have no demand to, you know, be with all the other apps on a single chain. They'd rather have their own chain and run their own validators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, I can see the whole sort of Celestia thesis kind of playing out in the sense where the SVM is super performant and the Celestia is super optimized for the data availability side of things. And so maybe not, at least in my opinion, not this cycle, but maybe like in another cycle, you'd see like the majority of these, you know, hopefully, you know, big applications, you know, deploying as, let's say, Celestia app chains using the SVM. And I guess Eclipse would be the first kind of run at this where like they're just starting from the generalized approach in terms of it's not some huge existing application that they're putting onto Celestia. But I do think it'll be super valuable to see, just like, again, when an ecosystem is super early, you need to find out, preferably sooner rather than later, like, how is it going to break? How, you know, like, does this actually work? Is the throughput actually 5 TPS instead of, you know, 50,000 or whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that'll be another good one to watch, just to prove or disprove the like applicability and viability of using the SVM in these different instances. I'm personally pretty optimistic. I think it'll go pretty well, but you never know until you know. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if you contrast, like, for example, Eclipse, and then look at the existing L2s, I'm thinking about like Optimism, Arbitrum, From everything we've talked about so far, it seems like there's just so many experiments going on, and a lot of them are quite promising. How are those L2s doing? We've seen a few halts or issues with Arbitrum. I think there was a problem a couple of days ago. Like, how do you see their prospects moving forward when there's so much competition?
It's definitely a knife fight in the L2 land, and like when you have people, it's constant tech race until you get to the point where there's like a diminishing marginal return on like your throughput or your latency or whatever. Where like, let's say you have 10,000 transactions per second, someone else coming out with 10,500, it really doesn't mean that much. But when the current L2s are 10, 15, 20, maybe that's a capacity thing, not like or like a demand thing, not like a capacity thing. Even if we say the capacity is, 80, 100, someone comes out and has 500, but, that is a legitimate, competitive threat. And, I think like optimistic rollups, they have their own roadmap in terms of broadening the level of scale that they have. But the problem that I've always seen is that when you compare it to even like ZK rollups, SVM rollups, those are technologies that have at least in theory, have a method to get to far greater levels of scale, like today, now. Whereas, some of the proposed fixes and methods and EIPs, et cetera, you add them all together, like they'll take years for both the ESL1 and for like optimistic rollups to reach a level of parity with what these other technologies have today. And these other teams, be SVM related or ZK related or other L1s or Cosmos, they're not just going to do nothing for 2 years.
They're not stopping.
Exactly.
Stopping.
So
right, yeah.
By then, it's going to be, you're going to have FireDancer, and then SVM rollups will also have FireDancer by extension. Okay, then what do? You spent a year catching up to where SVM was, ideally, where SVM was in 2023, but by 2025, the SVM is improved by 50x. So, it just becomes a very difficult game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you put it really well, and I have trouble being bullish, but I don't know it intimately, and some of the ETH guys I know, they know the roadmap pretty closely, and they still have some stuff to be excited about. But I mean, we don't even have time to go into like Starknet, and there's even other competitors inside the sort of ETH bubble that look really promising, and not to mention like the existing L2s. Not only do they have like quite low throughput, but the fees are also not too cheap yet. So it's hard to see like what advantage they'll actually have in the next, say, year. And the last thing I'll say is like crypto is actually great both for the developer and for the user in terms of solving that cold start problem, because each of those new ecosystems will be copy pasting the existing primitives, and they'll have rewards and etc. So both for the the developers will be rewarded by there's that famous meme of like the Uniswap, Uniswap on BNB, Uniswap on this, So there's always that sort of like carnival stage as well, where people kind of basically look to get rewards on the new chains as well. Okay, let's keep moving. And the last one, actually no, not the last one. What are your thoughts on Ethereum, like as the base Ethereum?
I think it's in a really tough spot, unfortunately. I'm someone who came up on Ethereum. I loved Ethereum for the longest time. But again, I think it's the exact same thing as the L2s, where the absolute best case scenario, I guess given the Ethereum roadmap, absolute best case is that one or a number of L2s are at the same level or greater performance than the alternatives, such that the marginal developer will want to deploy, large scale applications on L2s, and that will drive in aggregate like a lot of C demand for the ETH L1, because these rollups are all batching, let's say millions of transactions together and then posting that to the L1, and just doing that over and over and over again drives like huge fee demand, and that's what keeps the burn going and the ultrasound money, et cetera, et cetera. I just think they're a ways away from that. And I think there's huge path dependency that a lot of people aren't really taking into account, where like, even if in theory, if you combine like EIP 4844 and then you get to the full level of dank sharding and all these things, like they themselves have said that these things are going to take like a year, 2 years, 3 years to really flesh every single component out, get to that level of scalability. And like the industry's not just going to sit on its thumbs for 3 years, or 2 years, or even 1 year, or even 6 months, And so when that's the case, I just feel like the fact of the matter is right now, like everyone's starting to realize that Solana by far and away outperforms every other chain right now in terms of fees, in terms of speed, in terms of latency, just on every front.
Yes.
And like, that's what people are starting to realize. That's what people have been trying to tell people. But it's one of these really reflexive things, right? Where, someone starts to use it, they realize how good it is, they tell other people, they start to use it, it doesn't break, they realize how good it is, they tell other people, it just keeps like positive flywheeling. And then the opposite is also true, where like, let's say you came to use Solana because you wanted to farm some airdrops, and then you go back to use Ethereum and you're like, wait a minute, like now I'm paying like crazy amounts of money to do like some simple operation on ETH L1, or even if I'm on L2, just because like a lot of people are trading Pepe today, all of a sudden like it cost me like $1.50 to do like a simple operation on, like insert L2, right? And so I just think that's one of those kind of things that, barring some massive change, like that change in perspective is just going to continue and continue and continue until either A, Solana breaks, which like that could definitely happen. It could go down again, like for any number of reasons, or B, like the state of usability on either ETH-L1 or more likely like ETH-L2s increases drastically. And I just don't know if and when that's going to happen.
Yeah, where that even comes from. Yeah. Okay, I think we can skip Solana because we're going to talk about Solana for the rest of the pod. So let's skip that one. So I saw on your Twitter that you mentioned that you're working on a new piece, and as a reminder, you're a researcher, so this is why you have a thesis where a lot of degens don't. And this thesis is like accelerating the narrative, the Solana ecosystem thesis. I know you're working on it, so probably there'll be a big reveal sometime soon. But do you mind sharing a bit about the thesis before it releases?
I think the general idea that I'm operating under is that while yes, like this cycle we'll see a lot of the same old games that we played in the other cycle, both in terms of like literal games, but also just like financial games in terms of these speculative games, and things will go up and boom and bust and so on and so forth. But I also think that this is going to be the first cycle where you actually see like legitimate ecosystem of applications that like provide actual like service value to some group of users beyond just like, I want to buy tokens so before it goes up and sell it to someone else, and does so at scale. So in the past, you could say that, like, for example, all the innovations with DeFi on Ethereum, those were like huge value add things, Aave, Uniswap, etc. But they pretty quickly ran into like scale issues where like most people could no longer really derive any sense of value from using these things because they're priced out. Um, and so my hypothesis is that on the Solana side, both the old applications that we saw before will, so like DeFi stuff, for example, will be able to be used just like at scale by anyone, like any price point, so that's on one end. And then on the second end, we'll see a whole host of new applications that like are actually going to try and compete with real businesses to like gain real users, right? And that's something that's never been done before ever in crypto, other than like, maybe send money point A to point B. That's really it. Um, so that's kind of the broad thesis. And the reason why I'm excited about it is, the dominant thesis, maybe in crypto history, has been like the fat protocol thesis, which, just to summarize, is basically the idea that 80% or more, the vast majority of value will flow to like the base layers, the L1s. And that's what we've seen play out with like, of course, Bitcoin has gone crazy, Ethereum's gone crazy, Solana has gone crazy, died and is going crazy again. You're seeing all these new L1s that we talked about get all of the value. And I think that will continue. But the reason why I'm personally excited is while on the L1 side, at least in my opinion, the players that are going to accrue the majority of the value already like exist to a certain degree, at least in like a 5-year time frame. Maybe the AIs will have their own L1s in 50 years or whatever, but I don't know about all of that. But the players that are going to accrue a lot of this value, the L1 layer, they already exist. They already have fairly large market size. Even Solana, that's like 35 billion fully diluted or something like that. It could, and I do, maybe like it could go up a lot. But I think a much more asymmetric side of the equation is on the application side, because I think like almost none of the real applications has really either been built or have launched tokens, or maybe there's a few of them that have some kind of token, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you think about market cycles and like expanding market cycles, if that's the base assumption that I'm operating on, like I think there will be a bull market. Different people will have different, magical bull market targets for like the total market cap of crypto. Some people have said 6 trillion. Other people have said 10 trillion. The precision doesn't really matter. If I believe that almost none of the application layer value has really been created, then that's anywhere from like 1.2 trillion to 2 trillion. If I assume that 20% of the value goes to the application side, so 20% of 6 trillion, that's 1.2, 20% of 10 trillion, that's 2 trillion. Either way, it's trillions of dollars that are basically up for grabs. Whereas on the protocol side, I think it's just, number one, like much more saturated, although stuff will still like, a lot of room to run if it's going to increase by 5 trillion in value, which, just for reference for the listener, the cumulative total market cap of crypto right now is something like 1.5 trillion or something like that. I believe maybe a little bit more. So still a lot of room to run on that side, but also extremely high levels of competition, where you have like basically every venture fund over like a small size in cryptos aping into these L1s at huge valuations. And they have like huge levels of deal flow, huge levels of technical talent in-house. It's just a lot harder. You're not going to go find, at least in my opinion, you're not going to go find another Solana type thing where Solana is trading on public market for 50 million market cap in 2020. Like I'm highly doubtful that I, but I'm pretty optimistic you can find that on the application side. And I think the sky is the limit if that's the case.
Yeah, I love that. And I think Anatoly has kind of echoed that as well. He said like he fully expects if Solana succeeds that, you know, the value of all the apps and the revenue they're generating should be much bigger than the actual L1 that they're on top of, which I thought about it in the context of like, say, the Apple App Store. And I mean, it's true that Apple is probably the biggest company on the app. Like they're bigger than every company inside their app store. But I'm not sure, yeah, like how it works. For example, if you think about all the revenue of all the companies in the App Store, like I've never really done the maths there, but it's an interesting thing to consider. And I love the idea that there's so much value in the app ecosystem and so much potential yet. I agree. Like we've just gone over a list of 10 different L1s and L2s, and we can see it's a very competitive space. And we can say, like, one thing we can say for sure is like not all of them will succeed. Like most of them will fail to actually get product market fit, get escape velocity. So yeah, I suppose TLDR is like if you're very bullish on Solana and you see that it's achieving kind of product market fit and achieving escape velocity and finding adoption, with some apps are finding like mainstream adoption, then that would be basically a confirmation of your thesis. And for the person listening, NFA, start looking at ecosystem plays because that'll be a really bullish sign for those performant apps in the ecosystem. Sounds super cool, man. I'm really looking forward to reading that once it comes out. Let's move on now to perhaps the spiciest question, and that is the soul flippening. I don't even know if people are actually talking about this yet, but in the last cycle, I think it was the last cycle, there was the ETH flippening. It might have even been 2 cycles ago of the ETH flippening, of like ETH flipping Bitcoin. And it never happened. But there's a new flippening in town as Solana's been slowly climbing up the ranks. And we've seen like really high volume with Jupiter, maybe partially off the back of their token coming out soon. We've seen really like Solana doing higher NFT volume than Ethereum in some days lately, and it may close with higher monthly volume than Ethereum, which would be huge. We've also seen yesterday, like the stablecoin volume, I think it was 27 billion or around that number, and as low as 50 million in the bear market on Solana. And this was also higher than Ethereum. So we're seeing like the metrics really look like Solana is, almost neck and neck with Ethereum. Like if you didn't know the price or the market cap and you just looked at the metrics, you might think, wow, these things should be pretty equal. And yet the market cap is, I don't know, like 8x smaller or 6x or something, much smaller. So yeah, what's your take here? Like, are we heading for a flippening in this cycle? Do you think a flippening is likely? Yeah, what I'm even curious, like what percentage you put it at these days.
I didn't for a second there. Well, you said I'm even curious, and then I didn't catch it.
Yeah. I'm even curious, like if you'd put a percentage at it, because I saw Santi on Empire said I think like 25% or something within this next cycle. So do you have some thoughts there?
First, I'll back up and go down history lane, I suppose.
Yeah.
Back to 2017, which by the way I wasn't there for, but study your history, kids, I suppose. Even though anyways. So in 2017, like XRP was able to flip Ethereum, albeit both at much smaller market caps than Ethereum is today, and that was off of like pure XRP moon boy hype, like it's gonna be the banking, whatever the XRP meme was back then. And I think you brought up a really good point, which is that if someone never knew the price of Solana and Ethereum and just ran down the list of the metrics, almost certainly they would think that these things are of relatively similar value. That's of course not the case in terms of market cap. So for me, and like I had been tweeting this since like maybe a month or two ago, which is that, Solana will flip Ethereum on all the relevant metrics. And like the relevant metrics, in my opinion, are the usage metrics. That's what's real, right? Like, of course, there's speculative aspects to DEX volume and you're expecting token airdrops, and there's speculative aspects to NFT volume when you're expecting airdrops. But I mean, it's not like Ethereum wasn't doing these exact same things, or isn't even currently doing. Look at something like Blur, like they had the same seasons, same kind of setup that something like a Tensor has, for example. So it's not too different on that front. And look, ultimately, I think that a flippening on the market cap side is very difficult, just numerically speaking. Even if I truly believe that Solana is better than Ethereum on almost every single front at this point, it's just a lot of money. It's a lot of inflows that it takes. And you basically would have to see, which, to be fair, I think we're actually seeing the beginning of this with people like Santiago, like you mentioned. You have to see massive capitulation on the Ethereum side, like into the Solana side. Like the market will expand generally. That'll push up the price of, at least theoretically, push up the price of all of these different tokens. As more investors are like, no, crypto's not dead. I want to buy this. I want to buy that. Who knows what they buy? But to close that big of a gap, you have to see massive flows towards Solana, and like I don't know if that will be the case. If I had a crystal ball, like I'd be using it right now. But to give another history lesson, you look at something like Ethereum. Ethereum was in a similar position against Bitcoin 2019, let's say. And Ethereum passed Bitcoin on all of Bitcoin's relevant metrics when it comes to, user count and value settled and all these other things. And people called for Ethereum to flip Bitcoin last cycle, but it didn't materialize, even though one can make an argument that, on all fronts, Ethereum is better than Bitcoin. So I don't know. I don't have a percentage for people, but like, at least for the things that I think truly matter, which are, the UX, how many people are using this thing, is the user experience degrading at scale, all of those types of things. I think it's, it might not be game, set, match, but I think it's getting close to that with respect to
definitely set
Solana. Yeah, it's definitely set at the very least. So, so that's kind of my conservative kind of take.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, because usually people think about the price going up, but I think, as you say, like also there's capitulation is a factor as well, and the difference is just so great. I mean, we are seeing like pretty negative kind of. It feels pretty negative in the ETH space, at least when I dip my head in. But it's a huge gap. We'll keep an eye on this one. Let's move on. You didn't want to give a prediction on the flippening percentage, but we do want to do a few 2024 predictions, as it is almost the Christmas. We're almost in the new year, so I'd like to get like 3 predictions from you for 2024.
Ooh, 3 predictions. All right. Well, I'll try and stay in my lane. I don't have any good macro, whatever. Like, I don't know what the hell's going on over there.
Yeah.
I would say, all right, an SVM rollup will flip one of the major EVM rollups, like for usage numbers. Not like, again, like I can't give you no Moonboy predictions.
Okay, yeah.
Or at least not with that one. Not with that one. So SVM rollup will flip an EVM rollup. I'll go at least 2 or 3 consumer apps on Solana will hit like over 1 million monthly active users. And like those will be like mainly like actual people, not like 0x degen emu whatever that like is farming this protocol.
Yeah.
And the last one, let's see, a new AI project, one that doesn't already exist, will do extremely well. However you want to define extremely well.
Okay. Actually, I did want to trace back to AI because you mentioned it early on. Like, do you think there, in terms of that prediction, like, do you think there is scope for OpenAI to be kind of like taken over in 2024, or do you think they'll keep their dominant position?
I don't know anything about taking over per se, but like most modern markets, they trend towards oligopoly, right? Like there's almost no market that's just like one player, 90% market share, GG, that's it. Mostly is like between 2 to 4. And like what we've seen is, we've seen the biggest and brightest minds in the history of AI, people like Andre Karpathy and others, literally say publicly that like decentralized AI needs to be a thing, right? So like from a narrative use perspective, like, and like AI is obviously the biggest topic like in the world right now, outside of our little crypto bubble where we follow the TPS of this chain and TPS of this chain. No one gives a shit about that. Like, even we don't really give a shit about that. We just use that to pass the time. You know what I mean? But outside of all that, I mean, AI is by far the biggest, both literal trend in terms of like potential to make actual gigantic changes in almost every field, but even more so than that, the biggest speculative trend by far. Where you have like entire companies across industries just try to jam AI in there because they don't even, it's just like, oh, we need AI. Of course, like you see that you can go look at the NVIDIA chart. They're adding hundreds upon hundreds of billions of market value. Like, I think NVIDIA might have added almost an entire crypto market's worth of market value in like 2 years. Like
That's insane.
It's just insane. Like their quarterly revenues. I mean, they're putting in like 50% revenue growth. And people just mass buying GPUs to do some unknown AI service, et cetera, et cetera. So long story short, there's gigantic speculative demand on the AI side. And on top of that, the brightest thinkers in the history of AI are calling for decentralized AI. So I just think that when you're thinking probabilistically and think like, okay, there's no guarantee that some like confluence of these factors leads to some amazing new project. Maybe that project already exists. I know a lot of the AI people, like they like BitTensor, for example. So maybe it's something like that. But I just think the probability is super high that crypto AI convergence is a gigantic theme going into the next year. And I'm just not sure whether like the project that really hits on all those cylinders has like a live token at this current point in time. And so that's why my prediction was like a new project,
Got you. I mean, look, we're hitting time here, but next time you're coming on, I would love to dive into like how like crypto can be leveraged by like AI agents, because it's hard to imagine an AI agent having a bank account and a credit card, and it has to, it all just seems very difficult versus having like a wallet that it can be topped up automatically and, for performing its functions. But that's, I think, a topic for another day, but a very fascinating one, and one that Solana is, again, like very well optimized for with the low fees. So let's call it. Kel, this has been an absolute pleasure. This has been like a whirlwind tour of different chains. We've gone over the I would say, bull thesis of Solana or a thesis of Solana. We've gone over like the potential for flippening, a bunch of predictions for next year. Thanks so much for coming on. Where can folks, follow you? And I do recommend that they do follow you. Where can they follow you on Twitter or X?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm KelXYZ. There's a little underscore at the end. It's like a little yellow crown, so hit me up there. Telegram, same thing. Always down to chat with people, so just hit my DMs.
And do turn on notifications because Kel is dropping alpha. Thanks so much for coming on, Kel. It's been a real pleasure, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Lee. We'll see you.
Alrighty, I'm here with Joe, the head of strategy at Composable, who are enabling trustless cross-chain connectivity. We're going to talk all things Kusama, Polkadot, IBC, connectivity today. Welcome, Joe. It's great to have you on.
Awesome. Glad to be here.
So I'd like to start off and kind of get your top of mind before we go into the products about like what you're excited about in crypto right now. It's an exciting moment right now. Things have changed, and I'm curious to get your take. Like, what's got you kind of passionate in crypto right now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess comparatively speaking, to last cycle, if you will, like a lot of the hype was about alternative L1s, whether it be like Solana, AVAX, some of these L2s, more like popular ones like Arbitrum. And I think a lot of people were kind of excited about that. And I think now it's sort of shifted a bit. I mean, for me personally, it's sort of been like, how do we play across all of these things? So I think for me, a lot of the infrastructure side has been interesting. Some of these modularity chains, like obviously Slush is the largest one, but things like Dimension or Conduit to kind of let you spin up these roll-ups pretty quickly. I think a lot of these things will sort of provide more of a seamless end user experience.
Yeah, got you. It definitely seems like things are converging in roughly in one direction more and more these days versus say 2 or 3 years ago. So we have a few terms that I think the mostly Solana audience, it's worth like defining a few terms before we dive in. And so there's a couple of things like, for example, IBC, and maybe just bringing people along for the ride about like Kusama as well, because although it's popular, I think in the Polkadot ecosystem, maybe some Solana listeners are not familiar. So would you mind like just giving kind of the brief intro to what IBC is, and maybe a brief intro to the background about Kusama as well?
Yeah, totally. So IBC stands for Inter-Blockchain Communication. It's sort of like the native, I'll call it bridging for ease of use here, but it's sort of the native bridging within the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think like the main highlight of IBC is it isn't reliant on something like a multi-sig to sort of keep funds safe as they move across these chains. So I think the easiest way for users or listeners to think about this is just the most trust minimized way of moving assets between blockchains.
Got you. And so for myself, I move, for example, to Sui or Cosmos, and I believe that we have some rollups now on Cosmos. So if you were, for example, bridging from Solana to an SVM rollup on Cosmos, you would be using IBC essentially to be bridging, right? Typically?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Got you. Okay. So that's IBC. That's kind of like the secret sauce of Cosmos, if we can say. And then can we go over Kusama?
Yeah, totally. So for listeners that don't know, Kusama is sort of the sister chain to Polkadot. And I think its original intended use case was sort of to be this testing work for Polkadot. So essentially, every team that was going to launch on Polkadot first launched on Kusama and use this as like a testing or staging ground for their parachain itself. And I should also say a lot of the runtime upgrades and improvements that come out on Polkadot from the core team or parity, they typically happen on Kusama as well. So it does sort of play this staging ground role, though I think last cycle we saw Kusama really explode as its own type of independent chain. And I think a lot more people sort of view it as its own, I guess, native L1 as opposed to just testing work that it was sort of soft.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, I also recall it being a canary chain, but having like a lot of coins that pumped in the last cycle that people were super excited about. and in general just being like quite a thriving ecosystem. I think I heard more about Kusama than Polkadot actually, so that goes to show something. Yeah,
Kusama was crazy last time around.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's dive into Composable and the kind of stack that you guys are building. Where should we start here? So maybe we start with the headquarters and what you refer to as Picasso. Can you bring us on the ride for Picasso?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like Picasso, the easiest way to think about it is an infrastructure layer. So Picasso sort of provides all the piping in terms of moving assets between networks. This is sort of the home base for IBC coming out of our team, and basically centers around everything IBC. So that's basically moving assets between Polkadot and Kusama, and now the Cosmos sort of to Ethereum or Solana as well. I think the easiest way to think about it is just kind of this underlying piping for what we'll be building in the future.
Okay. And then I guess you've kind of segued there. Like, what's the plan for the future in terms of how that'll be leveraged best?
Yeah, so sort of like I mentioned with launching, I guess like a test network of Kusama and then moving to Composable, I think we've kind of used these two networks in tandem in the sense that our Kusama side is sort of providing this underlying infrastructure and piping, which will then be utilized by our Polkadot side. So Composable will look to sort of access the piping and infrastructure that has been built by Picasso in a way that abstracts away a lot of the end user experience that we see today. So you could think about this like, I'm somebody and I have some ETH on Ethereum and I want to move it to Kusama to swap for assets. Well, I've got to go through Bridge 1, Dex 2, Bridge 3, and I have all these independent landing pages and all these different places that I have to go as the end user. But instead, Composable kind of looks to wrap this up and abstract all of that away. So realistically, all you say is like, hey, I want to swap something for how we can use fast samples, an easy example. And you should be able to do this all from one interface where the bridging and the swaps are all taken care of under the hood and you don't really have to worry about that.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And I've actually often heard that feature described, on the layer 2 roadmap for Ethereum. Like people say, yeah, it'll get abstracted away. I'm curious, like, how do you guys think about like how much abstraction is a good amount of abstraction, in the sense that something that I always wonder about is like, if we abstract too much away, like, do we lose the benefit to the part of that benefit is that the user can, they understand the security that they of the application or the dApp that they're using. Like, do you guys have a feel for like what is a healthy amount of abstraction, I guess?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I can speak from my personal opinion and then I'll speak sort of more composable side. Like for me, I think we all in this space underestimate like how big of like giga nerds we actually are, like firing up that mass, navigating through a DEX, going to a bridge. I mean, this stuff is extremely hard for like a normal person. Like just getting a swap done on Uniswap is something like out of this world. So I mean, for us, like at least at Composable, we feel like this should be something that can be expressed just as an intent. So me as a user comes and says, I want to swap Ethereum for Atom. And that should be all they have to deal with. I think like the navigation, the landing pages, and the independent apps, they'll all be there for kind of these super users that want to go deep in this stuff. But I think our perspective is that mass adoption in this space really is going to require abstracting this away, like to become the Google or the Netscape of the internet, so to speak, like where you really don't have to dive deep into this stuff to actually use it.
Yeah. I would be inclined to agree. I go a bit back and forth. I mean, on the one side, yeah, as I said before, it's like, you have this sense like, but doesn't that kind of abstract away some of the secret sauce of crypto, that people can be like, oh, I'm on this chain, therefore I have these security benefits. But on the flip side, it's like, yeah, that's not the main user. If we actually, get main level adoption, then that's not, our users will not be, as you said, they won't be technically adept enough to be like understanding exact trade-offs between chains. And so then what I arrive at in the end is like, it just has to be more efficient and better than the existing system, actually, without having to sell, like even not including the decentralized element, it has to be like offering a better price, has to be easier to use, etc. So I guess, in the end, it's going to look something like a Wise or something like for changing currencies, for example, like very abstracted away. Yeah, really, really cool to hear. And there's so much hard work that has to go into getting to that level of abstraction, right? Like this is what you guys are essentially building, the infrastructure and like the tooling and the pipes to create that level of abstraction for users.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think this stuff even goes like a layer further, like even what you mentioned, like getting best price. It's like, okay, well, how do you do that between chains? And I mean, I think something, I don't know how familiar you or listeners are with a platform like CowSwap, where you have this idea of solvers that go out and sort of look at different venues to trade assets on to provide the best price to the user. I think we sort of even reached that level where it's not just abstracting away the interface itself, it's really providing everything under the hood that makes it easiest and I guess best option for somebody to come to.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose Jupyter would be like the corollary on Solana that people are probably familiar with. And, you know, Jupyter is already a great experience, but already there's like a lot of complexity there that probably in the end, it'll just be like, you know, literally ETH to Solana. You won't get any details about slippage or whatever, because there'll be an app above it that abstracts all that information away and makes like good choices and keeps the user secure. Exactly. I noticed that you guys are also looking to, you know, as part of the IBC interoperability, as to also support Solana. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's something that we are actively working on right now.
Very cool. And so what kind of opportunities, you know, from a user facing perspective, what kind of opportunities would that unlock?
So I'll try to stay as smooth brain as possible on this, but for moving assets into Solana, we need a way to verify state proofs. And that's essentially just saying like, okay, chain 1 looks like this, chain 2 looks like that. These assets have moved across and everyone agrees on it. So the way that we've sort of looked into doing that is similar to what we see with platform like Eigenlayer, where you can provide restaking in the sense where assets within the Solana ecosystem that maybe, I mean, you can use Sol as the easiest example. So you stake your Sol, it's a proof of stake network, you receive some inflationary rewards. We repurpose these staked assets to provide economic security to this bridge itself. So this would look something pretty simply laid out, like a validator network that verifies transactions coming between the two chains. Users might go ahead and restake their MSOL or their Jito Sol and be able to earn additional yield on assets that are actually moving between these chains on top of what yield they would be earning normally from proof of stake rewards.
Okay, nice. I'm hearing yield. I'm hearing yield on top of yield. What are the main like kind of risks in that equation versus if I was just using, for example, Jito Sol or like MSOL on Solana?
Yeah, definitely. Well, most of the risks come in the behavior of the validators itself. So I guess to provide security across the bridge, you have stipulations or parameters where assets that are staked to these validators may be slashed. And typically this not moves for malicious behavior. An asset comes across the bridge, every validator agrees to it, but one validator says, no, this is wrong. They sign the transaction. I mean, there's a slew of ways that they can behave maliciously, but in this sense, the validator would see some type of penalty for that. And typically what happens is assets are slashed from that validator, then redistributed to the rest of the validator side. And that validator either has to move on their assets or they have to exit the set entirely. And for users that may have staked to that validator, they feel the brunt of this penalty as well.
Okay, got you. Okay, so essentially there would be you have to pay a bit of attention to like where you're restaking to, because if that person is not, you know, like on top of what they're doing or either maliciously or not just from incompetence, then you'll sort of suffer from that effect. Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Okay, and when you speak about Picasso, you mentioned like that's the piping that allows you to connect these different chains together. When is that also like how does that relate to Composable? Can you kind of complete the picture there?
Yeah, so I think Picasso just sort of acts as this, I guess, base layer for the big picture. So Picasso is just literally the piping. Assets moving across IBC, whether it's Kusama to Cosmos, Cosmos to Ethereum, etc., what have you. It really is just the infrastructure layer and everything that kind of goes to the bridging fees and stuff like that. For Composable, it's, I guess, the glue that kind of brings the picture together, or the app that kind of sits on top. that allows users to kind of come to one landing page, one application, and say like, I want to stake assets on Aave, on Ethereum, and borrow some USDC and send it to Solana. This should all be handled under one interface, kind of coming from Composable. So you can kind of just think about it as like a base layer and a layer on top, L2 stuff like that.
Got you. Do you think that we'll get to a point where, for example, if you're a Solana bull, or maybe just like there's a very efficient L2 on Ethereum, do you think we'll get to a point where like bridging is so seamless and so cheap that like there'll be certain chains that are just like done that their main function is to actually allow swaps from other chains, like that there'll be like kind of swapping chains that are used for their cheap fees?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I could see this in terms of like, let's say you're a user that has Ethereum and you want a small, I don't say might exist across a ton of different chains as well. I think this is sort of when I was speaking a little bit earlier, where you can get really complex with this stuff in terms of solvers looking at these transactions and saying like, okay, where is the best place to go? Maybe the best spot to buy a home isn't actually at Cosmos at the time. There might be chains or applications that are repurposed specifically for this that someone looked at as a venue to find these things. And in terms of like best execution or making this more seamless for the user, I think like the world is really our oyster in terms of the possibilities that we have at this point.
Yeah, got you. And so we've got just to make sure everyone's getting the picture, like we've got the pipes, we've got the glue on top, which is composable. And on top of composable, for example, as I understand, like other apps could be building and offering, opportunities or offering solutions to users. And powering that in some capacity is Pika, the token. Can you like just give us a brief rundown of like how the incentives are aligned around that token?
Yeah, so I think Pika is pretty easy to tackle here. It's sort of like anything in bridging kind of flows back to this asset itself. So it's primarily bridging fees, whether you're moving between chains. And I think the plan is to sort of just focus Pika realistically on this bridging side of things. So anything IBC, anywhere that a fee might come from, that's a Pika token.
Okay, got you. So if you're used to using Wormhole, for example, which is like one example of how you might be bridging currently on Solana, although you could in future be bridging through using on top of Composable, I think it would serve a similar function perhaps. But I think it's nice when the token accrual is like quite straightforward, not too much complexity. Before you were mentioning about the restaking with Solana, can we go a little bit more into that? And just because I think most people would have heard about restaking from Ethereum side. Is all restaking basically the same concept? And like, can we just do like a sort of TLDR on how the user would take advantage of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think very boiled down, yes, I think all restaking is the same concept in that you're sort of repurposing this economic security coming from the value of these assets. In terms of how a user could take advantage of that, it will become as simple as navigating to a landing page and sort of staking to a validator of your choice or self-selected by, I guess, the composable side of things.
Got you. And the reason why it's been so popular in Ethereum is, I guess, because there's a lot of like faith in Ether, the asset. And I guess that makes it like a popular selection to be restaked across different ecosystems because it has a lot of trust as a settlement layer. But this restaking opportunity sounds like it could also be, the future's weird, isn't it? Because you can just really imagine like many L1 assets being restaked across different chains. It's kind of going to be hard to keep track of in some sense, but it's an exciting future. How many times can you restake? Like, can you just continue restaking across different layers?
I guess we'll see. Right now, I guess we're on the first rank trip. But yeah, right now, it would just be one simple sense of restaking. And I guess like too, the idea like these liquid stake derivatives in general is like, hey, you're still you can't go buy do anything with them. A lot of people kind of sit in exactly for yield as it is. So to speak.
Yeah.
So restaking kind of just, I guess, provides an extra avenue to just like eke a little bit more yield out of your assets that might be sitting.
Got you. Yeah, interesting. It's a fascinating one actually, because I can also imagine a case where like people wouldn't want like other stakers from other chains earning some of the inflation from their chain. It's going to be very curious to see how it plays out. So yeah, how are you guys thinking about like say the next year? Like, what's the focus for you guys, and where's the sort of roadmap at, considering that vision of like connecting all these different chains with very consumer friendly applications in the end?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll stay away from timelines a little bit, but just kind of speaking in terms of product roadmap. I mean, for us, like we've kind of alluded to here, big ones for us on the Caso infrastructure side are going to be Ethereum IBC and Solana IBC. I think there's some other popular L2s and rollups that we'll definitely get to after those. But in terms of like these core L1 connections, I think that's sort of one of our big landmarks is completing those two. At that point is sort of when we'll look to roll out things from the composable side to sort of give users an easier way to interact with all these things that we, I guess, built the piping for, if you will. So I think that's kind of like the two large things that are on there. So.
Got you. And so in the previous episode I recorded with Kel, we did like a lightning round through a bunch of different sort of L1s and L2s, but we didn't cover Kusama. So I'm curious to get your take, like what is the kind of current status quo with Kusama, and like what's the vibe like?
Oh, that's a little bit of a tough one. I think a lot of dust hype that we saw in the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystems happened really early on in DeFi summer. Just as like people sort of looking at this network as like the next Ethereum, or the DeFi landscape will sort of be built out. So I think we've seen a lot of attention drawn away from that towards L2s on top of Ethereum, different data availability layer networks, all this kind of like crazy stuff and modularity that we're seeing come out today. But I think like, I don't know, the most attractive way to look at Kusama or Polkadot, I mean, they really did sort of build this modularity stack so ahead of everyone. I think it's been chugging along quite nicely. But it's sort of in a state that's like waiting for newer people to kind of come in and build upon. So I think a little bit nascent right now, but I think everything's sort of good to go and chugging along, if you will.
Okay, so the tech stack is looking pretty good though. It's just needs some more builders to leverage it.
Yeah, exactly.
Got you. Okay, cool. I think we're hitting time soon, Joe, but I want to ambush you before we jump off and get a few predictions for 2024 from you. They don't have to be crazy. They don't have to be super specific, but I'm curious to get a couple predictions from you about like the direction that you think we're heading. Also, as you probably know, it's not a super price focused podcast. So I'm more interested in like technical predictions or, kind of general meta in the crypto space.
Long. Okay, so I guess one like easy one I think most people are kind of seeing start to play out is like a move away from the use of layer 2s as they exist right now, like with direct connection to Ethereum, and start going through these modular stacks like a Celestia, Dimension Conduit, things like that. I think we'll see a lot more head in that direction. Man, I don't know. This is a tough one. I actually didn't think about this too much.
It's okay. I'm ambushing you. I mean, you've already made a prediction about the abstraction away of I guess the tough parts of crypto to make it super simple for users. I guess there's a question then with that prediction. Like, do you think that we get to that point within this bull cycle, or do you think it's still a few more years out?
I was gonna say, I mean, it'll be interesting to see play out. I think like one of the bigger things that we're starting to see become reality on Ethereum, at least in the background being built right now, are these things called intents. And that's sort of like I was talking about earlier, when you just tell the thing, I want to swap ETH Atom, and it goes and takes care of it. I think we start to see a lot more of that come into the picture. And maybe we don't get to the point of critical mass where it's being used everywhere this cycle, but I think we start to see, I guess, the switch flip in the way that just new users or end users actually interact with this stuff by the end of this cycle. I think we probably...
Got you. Another one that I'm wondering about is like, is this the cycle where DEXs consistently do more volume than SEXs, and I hope it is. But we'll see. I mean, we've already seen Uniswap doing more volume than Coinbase on some days. I don't know what it is if it's consistent yet, but we've seen huge growth in DEXs. Jupiter's doing huge volume in anticipation of their airdrop soon. So that's an exciting one to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that one's interesting too. When you think about all the firms that sort of fell apart over the last cycle, I think a lot of people that have been in this space are a lot more adverse to kind of heading to a centralized platform to trade in general. And then at this point, I mean, as far as trading something like derivatives, futures contracts, options, I mean, perps being the most popular of the bunch, but there's a whole ton of really good venues at this point across Solana and Ethereum. And I think users have a lot of optionality in that regard. So that'll be interesting to see. But I do think we start to see sort of this dominance on chain, if you will.
Yeah, I hope so as well. And that's all, like, a lot of those improvements are driven by like the day in, day out builders who have been building the infrastructure, the pipes, the tooling underneath these shiny applications to actually bring them forward in terms of their usability. And like that mission continues. And I can see that that's kind of what you guys are also going to be driving forward. I can't wait to check out once you guys go live with Solana support as well. Thanks so much for coming on, Joe, for sharing, for bringing us into like a different part that we're not usually checking out. And we can see definitely a vision moving forward of that multi-chain world that we were hoping for, really well connected with consumer-facing applications.
Yeah, 100%. Excited to get there, and thanks for having me.
A real pleasure. Thanks, Joe.